Welcome back out on the mushroom trail. It's another just beautiful September day, and the mushroom season is really kicking into full swing out here in the Cascades. Today, I plan to just ramble up this Cascade River, and I've no doubt that there'll be plenty to admire. Let's jump in. Let's see what we see. And look at this. Look what we're greeted with right away. This beautiful deep purple mushroom, otherworldly looking really. Let's zoom in and take a look. Look at that. This is what's commonly referred to as the violet webcap, Cortinarius violaceus. And if you look at this, look underneath. See how this has this cobwebby little veil? This is what's known as the cortina. This is how this particular genus, Cortinarius, gets its name. And we notice up top it's got this kind of velvety texture. Let's pan over here and take a look at a slightly bigger example of this. Boy, this color is just stunning. Let me see if I can get this to focus here and cooperate with us. There we go. Look at this. So the cap is going to have this kind of scaly or hairy, velvety texture to it. And if we look underneath, we see some remnants of that cortina. See those kind of web-like little fibers that are still intact? Let's give this a little bit of a tug, take a closer look. So you can see some of the spores caught in that web. So those are those rust brown spores. We also notice the gills are notched. They're even a darker, deeper purple. But boy, just really a stunner, isn't it? And this isn't a particularly uncommon mushroom out here, but it's definitely one that I always make sure to stop and admire and spend time with. I just think it's one of the most beautiful mushrooms that you'll ever encounter out here, and quite unique. Let's take a look up here. Look at these guys. So it's not just those two down there. Look at this whole batch of them. So sometimes these will occur individually all by their lonesome, but other times they'll be in little groups, as is the case here. Look at those spores down there. So that rust brown spore, you can really see it on this big guy. You can see this one's blown out. It almost looks like it outgrew its cap. You can see it kind of splitting and breaking a little bit, also a little wavy at the margin. These guys are definitely older, and you can see them out here doing their thing. You can still see that dry cap. That's one feature of this Cortinarius. So it's going to be dry, and it's going to have that velvety feel. Again, rust brown spores and those dark purple notched connected gills. Boy, just beautiful, right? Look at that. And if we pan over here, we've got yet another one hiding down here. Quite the looker, isn't it? Now, believe it or not, these are actually edible mushrooms. They're not ones that I would ever recommend, not ones that I've even tried. I've heard terrible things about the taste of these ones, and to me, they just don't look like something that's screaming at me to take it home to the table. But if you've tried this one and you've got an opinion, I'd love to hear from you in the comments, so let me know. And I suppose it's worth noting that there's over 500 Cortinarius species just here in the Pacific Northwest alone, and a lot of them do have varying shades of lavender on their cap, and those rust brown spores. So if you are looking to forage this, just be advised. Just beautiful though. So let's take a closer look at this younger one to really zoom in on the cortina, or that web-like veil underneath. So a lot of times these Cortinarius mushrooms are referred to as quartz or webcaps, which is a really apt common name for them. It's very fitting, as you can see right here. And boy, just beautiful. So this will be very evident on the younger specimens, and then as these mature or grow out, that web will become less and less pronounced. In fact, you may not see any indication of it at all on the larger ones, but usually you can detect at least a dangling web or two. But either way, just beautiful to look at. And check this out, right next to this beautiful little patch of violet webcaps, we've got opposite side of the color wheel, this yellowish orange, excellent choice edible mushroom. This is what's commonly referred to as the Yellowfoot or winter chanterelle, Craterellus tubaeformis. And if you look underneath, you'll see these forked veins that are decurrent running down the stipe, little dimple on the cap that's kind of a little brownish, and the stems are hollow. Sometimes at the base, you'll see that they're actually a little white. Yeah, you can see it right there. Also, look at how it's got this little kind of flattened groove in the stipe. That's very characteristic of this one. And even though this is a really small mushroom, it's very much desired and oftentimes even foraged commercially because you can oftentimes get this in mass. It'll fruit in abundance. They're ectomycorrhizal with conifers, and this is about as early as I typically see these in mid-September, even though you can find them early summer. They're most common, for sure, later in the late fall, early winter. So just awesome to see out here, and it's worth noting that taxonomy is based on a European species. Ours is different. There have been different proposed names like Craterellus neo-tubaeformis, but the taxonomy is still getting worked out on this one. And boy, look at this idyllic little mossy spot out here. I had to just pause to appreciate one of my favorite plants. If you're local here in the Pacific Northwest, you're probably no stranger to this one. This is the Devil's Club, Oplopanax horridus, which in Latin loosely translates to heavily armed cure-all. An interesting mix of words, to say the least, but this actually contains these little spines that'll inject a mild irritant. Some of you may have first-hand experience with that. A lot of times people are really surprised to learn that this one is very closely related to ginseng. And amongst the indigenous folks from this area, this was a really significant plant that was used not only for medicine, but it also had a lot of spiritual significance and was thought to ward off evil spirits. One of the more interesting uses that I've read about is the Lummi tribe actually mixing the charcoal from this bark with bear grease to create a black or sepia-colored face paint and tattoo ink. Just a really special plant that has a special significance out here in the forest. Always love to pause and to appreciate this one. And take a look up here, hiding just underneath the Devil's Club. We've got a beautiful example of one of our yellow corals, this one in the Ramaria genus. Even though a lot of the yellow spring corals make great edibles, it's a good rule of thumb to avoid the yellow corals in the fall time in terms of foraging. But boy, they sure are beautiful to look at. And just up here, very much a similar color to those yellow corals, we've got a familiar sight, the Pacific golden chanterelle. Notice these strongly decurrent vein-like gill structures moving down the stipe. I suspect we're going to bump into plenty of these today. And boy, the sheer number of mushrooms is almost overwhelming. Here we've got our old friend, the tiger's eye, Coltricia perennis, one of the few ectomycorrhizal polypores that we see out here. And over here, at first blush, this kind of looks to be the Western witch's hat, but see how it's got this fibrous structure? I believe that what we're looking at is probably the corn silk fiberhead in the Inocebi genus, but I suppose I should add that the Inocebi is a notoriously diverse and complicated genus. And boy, they're just everywhere, so much to investigate. This guy, let's see, I'm not 100% sure on this one. Look, it's actually covering up another mushroom that looks like a Laccaria. Let me know if you know what this polypore is. I'd be curious to hear from you. Kind of flappy, interesting to see. And here we've got, another Pacific golden chanterelle. I suspect this is the first couple of many out here. Awesome to see. Look at that guy. We'll let him be. And down from this, boy, it's hard to know which of these mushrooms to kind of target. There's just so many of them out here. This looks like a handsome little fellow, though. This is one that we see fairly often out here. This is in the Laccaria genus, commonly referred to as the Deceivers. likely in the Laccaria laccata group. You can see this kind of shiny stipe. These can take on a lot of different looks. Let me see if I can get it to focus here. The texture on this cap is really beautiful to look at. Let's see if we can get it to focus in. Yeah, here we go. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? One of the Deceivers. And wow, take a look at this just massive, blown out bolete. I believe that what we're looking at here is what's commonly referred to as the dark bitter bolete in the Caloboletus genus. This one, Caloboletus conifericola. And boy, just massive. This thing has some heft to it, that's for sure. We see yellow pore surface with some blue staining evident. We've also got on the top, we've got some cracking on that cap. Sometimes you'll see this in its older age on that leathery kind of dark brown look. We've also got some reticulation here on the stipe. Boy, just a real beautiful mushroom to look at. And again, this thing pretty far gone. We can see maybe a little bit bluing, but mostly just old age showing on this guy. But very cool to see out here, fun to look at, that's for sure. And all throughout the forest, there are plenty of good-sized mushrooms popping up, but there's also certainly a good number of small little mushrooms, like this little guy, just barely popping up through the mosses. This guy likely in the Mycena genus, a relatively complex genus. I have no idea the species, but I like seeing this one out here, and I'm seeing plenty of it. Look at that, isn't that something? Cool to see. And what a beautiful spot down here by the river. Boy, not bad. Take a look down here. We've got an amanita. So notice how we've got some warty remnants of a universal veil on the cap of this mushroom. It's got kind of that orangey Amanita aprica look to it, but I suspect that this is the flyagaric Amanita muscaria. This one, the color pigments are water soluble, so when it's exposed to rain, which it was, and sun and different stuff, it can really fade out like this. Notice if I pull this up, yeah, here's the egg or vulva that this was born out of. So again, those little specks on the cap of Amanitas are the remnants of the universal veil. And you know, some of you may know that this can be a great indicator species for king boletes, Boletus edulis. Either way, this one has certainly picked a very nice spot to call home. And look at this, right down here. These guys are just huge. You can see these vase-shaped fruit bodies that are really scaly on the top. I believe that this is what's known as the scaly vase false chanterelle, Turbinellus kaufmannii. And notice that it's got these fibrils up on the upper cap, kind of these scales, I should say, that are really pronounced and really upright, kind of standing up from that cap. Underneath, you see this super veiny. You see that this actually moves both longitudinally and horizontally as well, up near kind of the margin of that cap. Down by the base, we're probably going to see that these are more kind of chanterelle looking veins. Let's give this guy a tug and take a closer look. Man, this thing is just a monster. Look at the size of this thing. This has got some heft to it for sure. And yeah, there you see those kind of longitudinal veins, very reminiscent of a chanterelle. So you can see where it gets its name, the false chanterelle. This one, however, is definitely not edible. You could say too that it looks similar or somewhat resembles a pig's ear as well in the Gomphus genus, but this one is definitely not one that you want to take home to the table. It's likely to cause some GI upset if you were to mistake it. And you know, what separates this from other false chanterelles, namely the woolly false chanterelle, is that these fibers or scales that are up on the cap are going to be much more pronounced. Additionally, notice that the actual cap is more of kind of like a brownish or beigeish color. So that really is a distinguishing feature, but they can be somewhat similar. And, in fairness, the woolly false chanterelle can sometimes fade out and get to be a lighter color like this in age, but I'm quite convinced though that this is the scaly vase false chanterelle, Turbinellus kaufmannii, and boy, just epic proportions out here that it's reaching. Super cool to see. So take a look at this. We've got a really cool shelf mushroom growing off the side of this tree. Take a look. So we've got this white pinkish color. If I pan up, we see last year's fruiting bodies hanging on there, as well as some newer growth up above them. But this is the pink sherbet polypore, Leptoporus mollis. And it's really a beautiful looking mushroom. You'll notice that it's got this kind of white to light pinkish hue to it with these beautiful angular pores. This is a brown rot decayer that, like our reishi mushroom, is an annual. So this is going to grow seasonally, and it'll be here for a few months and then it'll wither away and come back again the following year. But just a real beautiful mushroom that is going to have a unique kind of hairy texture up on the cap that'll smooth out with age, and it'll eventually darken up and get to be a little darker color. But boy, just quite the work of art out here. Beautiful to look at. And here we've got an increasingly common sight for this time of year. This is one of our brittle gills in the Russula genus. Last week we spoke at length about the shrimp Russula, Russula xeramphelina, and this one, we'll put it through the rigorous test that we did on the other. Let me give this a sniff. So, not picking up a shrimpy aroma. You'll notice that I kind of scratched at that stipe. I'm also going to give it a little bit of a nibble and spit test. And yeah, so I actually got, rather than a bland taste, quite an acrid, kind of spicy flavor to it. You'll also notice that where I scratched it, we're not getting that distinct color change, the yellow to brown. So not sure exactly which Russula this is, but I'm convinced thoroughly that it's not the shrimp Russula. Up here we've got another little violet colored mushroom. Oh, that one got away for a sec. So earlier we looked at the violet webcap, and I referenced the idea that there are lots of quartz or Cortinarius mushrooms that have a violet hue to the cap. This being an example of one of those. So notice the rust brown spores, perhaps remnants of that cortina underneath. And if I give this a little bit of a tug, actually look up at this cap so you can see this is an entirely different texture than that violet webcap that we looked at a little bit ago. So you can see this has a little bit more shine to it. It's lacking that unique kind of texture. And this is very typical. As I referenced earlier, there are an incredible number of Cortinarius mushrooms out here in the forest, and they can oftentimes be quite difficult to differentiate. So this one, not 100% sure on the species, but another Cortinarius, beautiful to look at. And as I look off in the distance here, I'm catching a really great sight, the flash of many a chanterelle, at least I presume. So let's check that out. But before we check those chanterelles out, another thing catching my eye over here looks like one of our good friends, the king bolete, or the Porcini mushroom, Boletes edulis. So sometimes people compare this to looking like a hamburger bun or something, and you can certainly see why. This I can already tell is way past its prime. We're several days late to pick this one up, but let's take a look at it anyways. I kind of fear what I might see in here. Yeah, look at this. You can see this is just crawling with worms and it's soggy, so way past its prime. I had really good luck with these up in the North Cascades mid-August, but we're a little late to the party out here today, but always cool to see the Porcini out here. And sure enough, the Pacific golden chanterelle. So notice those vein-like ridges running decurrently down the stipe there. Classic chanterelle yellow. These are going to have that fruity kind of apricot aroma to them if you give them a sniff. And boy, as I look around here, the more closely that I look, the more that I'm seeing. It still seems like for this particular spot, these are reasonable size, but not huge. So I think that the overwhelming majority of these, I'm just going to leave. I'm going to pick a few. You know, I actually bumped into a fellow forager who was out specifically looking for chanterelles. Bumped into her earlier this morning. I think I'll just pick enough so that if I bump back into her, I can provide her with enough chanterelles for a meal. But to be honest, my fridge is pretty full right now, so I'm not going to be overly aggressive in my harvesting here today, but I will certainly make a mental note of where this spot is. And boy, this whole entire face is really crawling with chanterelles, and a lot of times you'll notice that they're going to grow in pairs, and they'll have a tendency to find every little nook and cranny in any given slope or little mossy carpeted area. You can really see it in here. There's no shortage, and I suspect that if I were to come back, say a week or so from now, maybe 2 weeks, I might get even more. So it'll be interesting to check back in on. And just up here, again, there's mushrooms just absolutely everywhere. I see another violet webcap among many others. But the one that I'm focused on most is back here in the background. So check this out. So this is one that a lot of times people are out searching for. This is the chicken of the woods, specifically the coniferous chicken of the woods, Laccaria conifericola. And you can see it, as the name suggests, growing on conifer wood. This almost looks like little fingers or hands reaching out from the wood. You can see it's got that really distinct, vibrant, bright orange to almost reddish appearance to it. Let's buck over this log and take a look at this other one, see if it looks any fresher. So this is one that can cause a lot of GI upset for people, especially if it's not harvested fresh. So you really want this to be soft and pliable if you're going to forage it and bring it home. This is a little further along than I would prefer. You can see, on this back layer, you can see something was chewing away at it. But look at the underside. So it's got this pored surface. You can really see those pores. This is a great edible mushroom for some. For others, it causes some GI upset. So if you're on the lookout for it and you find it, I would advise starting small and kind of testing yourself to see how you do with this one. But really cool to see it out here. Always a pleasure. And I'm super excited to be bumping into this one. We alluded to this earlier. This is a young example of the woolly false chanterelle, Turbanellus flaccosus. And this is just so cool to see since we witnessed Kaufmannii just a little bit ago. So notice that in the center of this has this reddish orange and a somewhat less kind of scaly center. So that color is real distinct and different from what we saw in Kaufmannii, as well as, it's still got those scales, but not as pronounced. But boy, what a beautiful one. And it's got that beige exterior with the wrinkled veins, similar to Kaufmannii. So you can see how those could get confused with one another. But it's super cool to be seeing both out here today. What a beauty. And look at this. Here's an absolutely beautiful little mushroom whose identity I'm not sure of. So notice it's got this depressed center. It's got this beautiful down-curved, scalloped margin. And there's lots of them growing off of this downed piece of, I think this is coniferous wood. And look at that, deeply decurrent gills. Beautiful, like I said, down curved scalloped margin. And boy, we've got all different stages here. So some that are just barely popping out, others that are a little mature. But it's worth noting that even the ones that are more mature are really still pretty tiny mushrooms. And as I look at these, there are a lot of different things that these remind me of, but I'm not sure what name to put to this. So if you're watching this and you've got an idea of what we're looking at here, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. But notice just a beautiful looking little mushroom, nice widely spaced gills, really photogenic little guy. So always a pleasure to be out here and to bump into something like this that just kind of strikes you as being particularly stunning and a bit of a mystery at the same time. So hopefully I'll be able to figure out what this is. If you have any ideas or leads on this, drop me a comment, let me know. Maybe I'm missing something obvious, or maybe it's something not so obvious, but either way, great to see. And here's a handsome mushroom. This is one of the grisettes, so this is actually in the Amanita family, likely the western grisette, Amanita pacicolea group. This is a unique Amanita in the sense that it doesn't have that annulus or ring that a lot of the Amanitas have, and that is so characteristic of some of the others. But you could see striations on the cap, umbo, dark kind of brown gray color, narrowly attached close gills. And when I pulled this up, I didn't get the egg or vulva that this was born out of, the universal veil. But if I dig underneath this, we'll see what we've got here. So you can see this clear little egg or sac that this thing was born out of. So this is actually surprisingly one of the edible Amanitas, but this is not a territory that I venture into. I steer clear of these and give them a wide berth because of the genus that they're in. But cool to see though, really beautiful. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Mushroom Trail. If you're liking these videos, hit the like button, subscribe, stay tuned, and until next time, happy trails.